Hi everyone, the latest homeless figures were released in Ireland and it showed that there's 15,580 people now in so-called emergency accommodation. Of that, there's 4,775 children. That's up 100 children on last month's figures. Nearly 5,000 children in so-called emergency accommodation. Fundamentally, they are state-sponsored incarceration facilities. The state have allowed this to get worse and have manufactured this crisis to benefit their rich friends, big landlords, vulture landlords, and many more making money out of the housing disaster, out of the misery of so many other people who are struggling to survive and exist. This is outrageous, but homelessness has become a massive industry. In the thumbnail picture on this video, there was a homeless hostel that has been identified as being vacant for nearly 3 years. Now, this was a guest house on Baggot Street called Latchford Hotel. Now, this is on number 99 and 100 Baggot Street. And this hotel was purchased in 2022 by the McVerry Trust, a housing charity stroke non-government organisation, or should I say government organisation. This was sold to McVerry Trust for €6.24 million. It went on the market at €5 million, which yet it was sold at nearly 20% above the asking price. McVerry Trust accessed funding through the Capital Assistance Scheme through Dublin City Council. This is part of the neoliberal outsourcing agenda of the government to the charity stroke non-government organisation sector that has gone on for many, many years and actually progressively got more lucrative for those in charge of those NGOs over the past number of years also. In 2023, the McVerry Trust itself was bailed out for €15 million. There are massive issues with governance, lack of oversight, scrutiny, auditing, major serious issues within that organisation about properties being sold by people who were involved in the company essentially to profit off. They also had somebody from the housing agency, the CEO, Bob Jordan, who at the time sold the property also to the McVerry Trust. Surely there's a massive conflict of interest. Coincidentally, the housing agency is just up the road from where this hostel is vacant. I highlighted a number of years ago a apartment complex, or rather hostel complex on Effer Road in Rathmines, Leinster Road West actually in Rathmines. And this was an accommodation that provided a roof over the head for people who were homeless. Hostel accommodation. Previously, Dublin City Council owned this hostel. Then it was transferred across towards the McVerry Trust. And I was contacted by a number of people who lived there a few years ago, and they were living in absolutely disgraceful conditions. Massive issues around damp, lack of maintenance of the property, serious issues, and not just those issues. The issues, the way they were treated by members of the management of that organisation was appalling. Of course, at the time I highlighted it, and thankfully, due to the support of the residents who were living there, they all got fixed up with secure homes following highlighting this. But of course, the media wouldn't touch this story. They never touched the story about the reality to what people are facing, whether it's a private landlord, whether it's the council, whether it's a housing NGO. They should all be treated the same way. Nobody should be living in deplorable conditions and be treated disgracefully by their landlord. Now, of course, 70% of the funding of McVerry Trust, like many of these non-government organisations, are state funding. And this has exponentially increased over the last few years. Between 2019 and 2022, there was over €140 million of public money transferred into the McVerry Trust. That's just one example. But when you consider in 2021, there was 140 million handed over to many of these housing charities, including Simon, Focus Ireland, McVerry Trust, and Threshold. This is a massive amount of public money. And at the same time, we've seen an increase in staff, an increase in funding, and reliance on this charitable sector. The light should be shone brightly on these sectors. Many CEOs and these organisations are on six-figure salaries. Many members of the senior management and management team are on massive, massive salaries. And from a fiscal point of view and from a fiscally prudent point of view, what is the bang for the buck for this? It's very hard to realise what the bang for the buck is when you think about homelessness figures on the rise and many people who are profiting from the homeless industry. Surely there's a massive crossover between these organisations that could be managed through the state, much the same as the immigration industry is managed through the state, where there's a bottomless pit of money to solve the immigration issue. And there's no end of money to solve it, but there's never money to resolve our housing disaster. There was never a call out to provide accommodation for our own full-blown humanitarian disaster with homelessness. There was never a call out for modular housing to be built for people who are homeless. There was never a decision and a strong action made by the Red Cross to do that either. Isn't that interesting? Maybe it doesn't fit the narrative, or doesn't suit the agenda, or it's not fashionable or trendy to talk about it, but these are the real issues facing people. In 2023, 40 people died on the streets of Dublin. And the government started a number of years ago this housing first policy, or they claimed there was a housing first policy, where people would off the streets would get supports to live in a secure home. And of course, this was lauded with much fanfare by the media to say this was a great way to get people off the streets and into long-term secure accommodation. But in the first instance, people shouldn't have to go on the streets if they weren't evicted from the private rented sector. Up to 70% of people who go forced into homelessness come from an insecure private rented sector. And we can now go back to the time of the Troika coming to Ireland, the IMF, the European Central Bank and the European Union, which ordered the Irish government not to build public housing and opened the door to vulture funds who profited from knockdown prices off NAMA and, of course, a low tax regime and massive, massive rents, and still cause carnage in Irish society to this day as the housing disaster gets worse, with average rents of €2,000 per month, average house prices 330, 40, 50,000 euro across the nation. And at the same time, we see people who are struggling. And even with this housing first policy, McVery Trust have finished their contract last year. And now there's so many people who are without management of these contracts in terms of housing first policies. Up to 250 in Dublin are still awaiting a new NGO to manage their contracts. Notwithstanding, many who are supposed to be coming out of homelessness and being offered those supports and security aren't being offered those because that's all stalled. Meanwhile, at the same time, the budgets seem to go through the roof. In 2021, over 140 million, as I stated earlier, was paid over to these NGOs with 1,800 staff. Many of these have increased their staff over the past number of years, but yet homelessness has increased. Wonder why? It's a neoliberal model and the outsourcing of housing and the view and perception of it as a charity. Housing in a home should be seen as a social and a societal good, which is a positive building block towards living a dignified life in our country. But of course, so many in Ireland don't see it as that. Many who continue to support the establishment parties definitely don't see it like that. They've rationalised it in their own heads to blame the person for being homeless, rather than dealing with the underlying societal issues. And many who end up homeless blame themselves for being homeless. But of course, fundamentally, it's down to the societal system that benefits those that have versus those that don't have, and many who are struggling. And then at the same time, the government pretend they're coming up with solutions by farming over to these unregulated, essentially, even with the charities regulated, and unrestricted, who work with impunity in terms of the NGO sector. Of course, that's part of the neoliberal agenda and the outsourcing of housing to private interests. It needs to radically shift in Ireland. We need to shift the dial, put it back as a social good, take it back in-house to the state to support these services and control them properly, rather than farm them out to these massive multi-million euro enterprises and the multi-million euro industry to what it's become. But of course, many in the establishment don't even tackle them. They won't say anything about it because they don't want to rock the boat, and they don't want to say, well, They're doing work, and it's better if somebody's doing work than nobody's doing work. But unfortunately, the perception has to change in terms of the view of home as a social good in society, and to stop so many people profiting off, in particular, public homes for people, and many people who are struggling to get by day to day with many issues in society. When you consider in 2023, 40 people died in the streets. In the latest rough sleeper count, there was 120 found around the streets of Dublin. People's lives are being destroyed, notwithstanding those who were in the state-sponsored incarceration facilities. Back in the 70s and 80s, many thought it was fantastic to see the end of the mother and baby homes. Of course it was, but at the same time, many of those now still agree with homelessness and agree with these state-sponsored incarceration facilities, which the so-called emergency accommodation is. Back in 2017, Simon Coveney, Minister for Housing, said it would be finished. Everybody would be out of these hotels and guest houses by the middle of 2017. Here we are in the middle of 2025, and we have an absolute tsunami, and more people coming into this sector because of the lack of security in their homes. And on top of that, we have an out of control immigration system, adding carnage to what already is a disaster in our society, and punching down on people who are already struggling, while the very wealthy do well out of this. And that's who the system works for, versus those who don't. But it's time, as Jim Larkin said, people arise and get off their knees, and they only feel powerful or look powerful because many are on their knees. But it's time to rise off our knees and people to stand up for what's right in our society and put the interests of ordinary people first. And that starts with putting a home as a social good in society, as a proper foundation block for a civilized and functional society. So thanks for all my videos, really appreciate them. Please like my videos also, and thanks to everybody who continues to share my videos as well. And I'm really grateful for everybody who continues to share them, because it's great to get the message out far and wide. So please share them and get the real news out to what's going on in our society, because the media won't talk about this. The discussions won't be on this in Dáil Éireann. They'll be just silenced, and it'll be just rationalised and normalised, and all the normal nonsense that'll come out all the time will be more of the same nonsense that won't deal with the crisis and say it's complex, it's complicated and all this sort of nonsense, when it's not the technical issue that they try and present it as. So thanks a lot for the support, really appreciate them, and slán go fóill. Take care, bye bye.